What happens when the President of the United States exerts police authority over a city? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, I got to say, as a conservative and a constitutionalist, when I first started hearing that the Trump administration was basically usurping some of the police authority of Washington, D.C., the city, that got my back up a little bit. And I thought, what in the world is going on here? How can we justify this? Stephen Green, I early on noticed something, though. The claim kept being made that Washington, D.C.'s crime rate has been on the decline and is perhaps at a 30-year low. So the Trump administration's argument that it needed to step in because of an emergency, and it acted under emergency powers in order to, how do I say this, to undercut the Home Rule Charter that was established in 1973 for Washington, D.C. Those emergency powers were unnecessary because D.C. is in a decline as far as crime rate goes. But Steve, I did just a cursory little query on one of the AI agent search engines and saw that while they may be on a decline in general, it's not a low crime city. And it is the seat of the federal government. It is one of the higher crime rate cities in the country, including violent crimes. Steve, do you think the president is justified in exercising these still contested powers the latest that we've heard before we record this is the Attorney General was basically replacing the police chief of D.C. by putting the Drug Enforcement Agency's head over the police chief. Is the president justified in this emergency powers action, or is that just political posturing?
Before I get to that, let me tell you a little bit about the crime situation in D.C. Everybody who I know that lives in D.C., well, tend to know them virtually via Twitter, is just scared to death of their own city. And it doesn't really matter where they live anymore. It's not the bad part of town. It's just the town. And the police chief got caught lying about the crime stats in the last couple of years. A woman who tried to whistleblow just settled out of court with the police department, I believe it was, for finding all these crimes that weren't being reported. So whatever the statistics are, they're lies. That's what they are. They're absolute lies.
But even if they're right, Steve, you still have a pretty high crime city. And to make the argument, when I heard them making the argument that it's on the decline, I immediately thought, well, what is it?
Yeah, and it's bad. Home rule has been a disaster for the district. It was like a lot of things that happened in the Nixon administration. Maybe it seemed like a good idea at the time. Is probably the absolute best thing you could possibly say about it. And Scott, I know you're a Constitution fanboy, as you called yourself in the Backstage episode, which is exclusive to BillWhittle.com members. But the Constitution says about the district and the capital that Congress shall exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, as may by session of particular states, as just the establishment of it. But Congress has complete control over the district. So any home rule exists at the what's the word I'm looking for? Exists at the sufferance, I suppose, of the Congress. And I like to think in my shriveled black little heart that one of the reasons the founders gave Congress exclusive authority over the district was to keep them too busy to mess with the rest of us. So what I'm trying to say here is that Congress established home rule that has been a disaster. Washington, D.C., the federal capital, is essentially lawless in the sense that it's a sanctuary city. The capital is lawless. It rejects federal law on immigration. So if you ask me, that right there, if we're going to go by the January 6th very broad definition of insurrection. That right there is insurrection. The capital of the United States is in a state of insurrection. If that doesn't justify some emergency measures, which, by the way, I'm not a fan of, you gotta
Yeah.
go pretty far in some direction or another for me to say, okay, maybe we need some emergency measures here. But if the capital, being in a state of insurrection against federal law, does not justify emergency measures, Scott, what does?
So, Bill Whittle, believe it or not, Mayor Muriel Bowser has been at least putting up a good face through this, as if the local city government were cooperating with the Trump administration and appreciated the extra hand and things like that. In addition, I've seen in several stories that even though they've called in some National Guard troops, they're serving in an unarmed role. It's a support role. FBI personnel are involved, but I get the sense that the same thing is happening there. It's not that President Trump doesn't want to have guns on the streets, federal guns on the streets, so to speak. Can the argument be made, even though, like I said, I bristle as Steve does, at having the federal government taking over local authority in any context here? Could the argument be made that, hey, this is the nation's capital. We bring leaders and diplomats from around the world to this place. It is incumbent upon us to have a safe environment here. Whether for years Washington, D.C. has been in decline in crime doesn't matter. If it's unsafe now, I just got here for my second term. I don't want it to be an unsafe place. Couldn't the argument be made that if the D.C. Police Department can't make Washington, D.C. the safest major city in the country, that the federal government has a right to come alongside and say, hey, do you guys need a little help?
Yeah, I'd like to take a look at this from like three different levels. So there's like the meta level from orbit, the capital cities of Western Europe all of them have become enormously more dangerous in the last 30 or 40 years because of things like unchecked immigration. London is more dangerous than New York was, at least New York under a Republican mayor. Paris is essentially lost to lawlessness. Berlin, Sweden and Stockholm, even Oslo, Norway, are just experiencing these major crime sprees. And so on a meta level, on the upper level, it's another example of America changing course from this inevitable decline of the West. It's an attempt to restore the rule of law in a society that had gotten so used to ignoring the rule of law that it was just simply an everyday occurrence. I never thought I'd live to see any of this stuff. I really, honestly, never did. So on one level, yes, I completely agree with you. The capital of the United States of America should be a safe and secure place, not just because of foreign visitors, but because it's the capital of the United States of America.
Yeah.
Period. Right. On the mid-level, it's the only city in America that the president has the power to do this with, because of the unique stature of the district and because of Washington, D.C.'s politically unique situation. It's the only place that he can actually do this. And so the question then becomes, number one, is it justified, and is there a political motivation behind it, and so on? There are some rules that appear to be built into nature, laws of gravitation and relativity and all of this. And one of the rules that seems to be built into human behavior is the 80-20 rule, which extends much wider than human behavior. For those of you not familiar with it, just one example is you use 20% of your tools 80% of the time, and so on. So Donald Trump has an absolutely uncanny ear for finding an 80-20 argument and then landing on the 80 side of the 80-20 argument. Yeah. And that forces the Democrats, whose entire political party is predicated on being anti-Trump. They have no clearly expressed agenda. They have no clearly expressed goals or aspirations or philosophy. It's just, we disagree with Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump can find something that 80% of Americans can agree on, like enforcing our borders and getting men out of transgender sports and so on, he's going to land there, and he's going to he's going to not only pick up the 80%, he's going to force the Democrats into the 20%, which is about what their approval rating is now. But to me, the justification of this, whether it's justified or not, comes down to the day-to-day life of the average citizens of Washington, D.C. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where you determine whether or not this was enough of an emergency to justify it or whether it's just a political power grab. And I so far have seen 4 videos, 3 of them from Black Americans and one from what looked like a white liberal, all 4 of which carrying exactly the same message, and that is stunned disbelief at how safe they suddenly feel because there aren't gunshots in their neighborhood. I saw one just this morning about a young black woman who said, this is the first time in my life, a D.C. resident, that I have ever felt like I could stop my car at a red light at nighttime and not have to constantly be scanning my mirrors to see if I was about to get mugged, carjacked, killed, or whatever the case may be. So if it turns out that the vast majority of the citizens feel safer because of this action, then the president, by taking this action, has followed through his constitutional duty to protect the citizens of the United States of America from enemies foreign and domestic. So to me, I don't have any problem with it. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him. But nevertheless, it is. I think it is within his constitutional authority, and the reception that seems to be coming from the people who live in D.C. is that he made this calculation correctly. That 4 out of 5, that 80% of the residents of Washington D.C. feel safer. They feel like their government is protecting them instead of abandoning them. And I would like to see this continue in Washington until it becomes the safest large city in America. Was it the Washington police chief who didn't know what the chain of command? Was that her that I saw? Was it a black woman?
Oh, I missed that.
Is she a black woman with short hair?
I only read about her. I didn't
virtually
look at
positive,
pictures.
not 100% positive. I just want to qualify that. Might have been another city. But I think that the police chief of Washington was asked. I saw the video. Was asked. So what does this do to your chain of command? And she said, "What's a chain of command?"
Oh, she didn't understand the concept of
She
chain
did
of
not
command?
understand the concept of chain
Oh,
of
okay.
command.
Okay. Maybe she was being sardonic, but probably not.
Yeah, I'm going to go with ignorant.
So here's the way I see this, at least on the surface. I mean, this is quickly developing, and who knows what anybody's real motives are at this point. The city attorney for Washington, D.C. has told Mayor Bowser that she does not have to comply with some aspects of the Trump administration rules. They are pushing back and refusing to comply with Attorney General Pam Bondi's designation of the director of the Drug Enforcement Agency as the temporary interim police chief, basically meaning that the actual police chief Smith has to go through, can't issue directives without permission from the DEA chief. What I see here is an extraordinary situation. As you guys pointed out, Washington, D.C. is not a city in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a federal district. And in fact, I was listening to an NPR report about this, and they referred to Washington, D.C. as a state. And I was like,
Oh, wishful thinking on NPR's part.
Well, and that's where their headquarters is. So anyway, here's what I see it as. I think President Trump has put his finger upon a place in the United States that he can use as a demonstration, as an experiment, and basically to say, look, we want to come alongside of a Democratic mayor of this city and help her to make this city not only safe, but a bastion of freedom for education and other things. We've done stories in the past about the problems with D.C. area schools outside of the private ones that the politicians send their kids to. And so let's come alongside of Mayor Bowser and say, let's turn this into the model city. Let's make this into a situation where other cities are asking Mayor Bowser to come and give speeches and seminars to them about how you can be a Democrat and still run a city that's safe with a well-educated populace that is growing and prosperous and not entirely dependent upon federal government largesse for its sustenance. Yes, this is, in a certain extent, performative on the president's part, but I think performative in the best sense of the word. I am very reluctant to see armed National Guard troops on the streets of Washington, D.C. I would only in super extraordinary circumstances do I want to see that. But I think there's an opportunity in here so that visitors to Washington, D.C., as I have been on a number of occasions, don't have to be told by locals essentially, hey, have a good time in Washington, D.C., but please stay inside the borders of the park. Make sure that you don't go past the electrified 30-foot tall fence, because that is where the pterodactyls and the Tyrannosaurus exist. So stay inside the park and everything will be okay with you. Don't go to those places where you're counting the seconds until the light changes to green so that you can bolt out of there and not get carjacked. And that's the way the city has been for decades. There's an opportunity here, and I think Mayor Bowser had the right approach early by saying, well, let's not make a big stink over this. Let's cooperate to the extent that which we are able to cooperate. I hope she picks that thread up again, and instead of listening to the advice of her attorneys who tell her you don't have to obey this, to say, well, I don't have to obey it, but I don't have to disobey it either. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.